Picture this, you're standing in the living room and your father's voice fills the entire house, not with laughter or warmth, but with the kind of authority that makes everyone freeze mid-step. Your mother appears from the kitchen, already smoothing things over, already making excuses, already ensuring that everyone falls into line with whatever he's decided. And you're learning in real time that love comes with conditions, that your voice doesn't matter as much as his moods, that the safest way to exist is to become smaller. This is an example of the world of the patriarch wannabe, and it's far more common than most people realize. In this channel, we've spent considerable time examining the matriarch wannabe, the controlling mother figure whose psychological grip shapes everything from your self-worth to your adult relationships. We've explored the enabling patriarch who stands by, allowing the dysfunction to flourish unchallenged. That information has been valuable, even life-changing, for many who've reached out to share their stories. But here's the question that keeps showing up in my sessions with my clients and in private messages. What happens when the script is flipped? What if the toxicity emanates from the father figure? What if the enabler wearing the mask of peacekeeper is actually your mother? What if the entire dynamic you've been trying to understand suddenly looks different because the roles are reversed? Today we're diving deep into this terrain. We're exploring what happens when the wannabe is the patriarch and the enabler is the matriarch. Before we go further, let me be crystal clear about something. Not every strict father is a patriarch wannabe. Not every accommodating mother is an enabler. Parents can have authoritative moments, firm boundaries, even controlling tendencies in isolated incidences, while still being fundamentally loving, supportive people who contribute meaningfully to your development. This isn't about constructing a case against your parents. It's not about collecting evidence of their failures or building a wall of resentment brick by bitter brick. This is about pattern recognition. I see the same stories playing out across different families, different cultures, different socioeconomic backgrounds. I see people in their 30s, 40s, 50s, and older still trying to figure out why relationships feel so complicated, why boundaries feel impossible, why their internal compass seems perpetually miscalibrated. And when we trace it back, when we really excavate the foundation, we often find these dynamics at the root. Think of it like this. If you keep getting flat tires on the same stretch of road, at some point you need to stop blaming yourself for poor driving and start examining what's actually on that road. You're not betraying anyone by gaining clarity. You're not being disloyal by seeking to understand the cause of your struggles. You're doing what every healthy adult should do. You're taking responsibility for your own internal alignment and calibration. And let me be clear about something else. Assessing whether you have a patriarch wannabe or a matriarch wannabe in your life doesn't mean you have to sever the relationship. Many of my clients maintain connections with their families, but they do so with new parameters, with conscious awareness, with boundaries that protect their peace rather than sacrificing it. This isn't about choosing between family and freedom. It's about building the internal strength to have both on your terms, if that's what you choose. If particular aspects of what we discussed today resonate with you, if you recognize patterns or see your own story here, I want to hear from you. Comment below, share what lands for you. This community is built on our collective willingness to name what's unnamed, to see what's been invisible. Everything I share here, every concept, every framework, every story, falls under the banner of what I call internal relational capital. Think of it as the emotional, psychological, and relational currency you build within yourself. It's the reserve you draw from in every connection you touch. It's what determines whether you enter relationships from a place of wholeness or woundedness, abundance or scarcity, clarity or confusion. Whether we're unpacking the deep conditioning of the false village, healing the emotional imprints of the mother wound, addressing the father wound, or stepping into the transformative practices of groundwork leadership, it all comes back to one fundamental truth. The strength of your internal relational world determines the quality of your external relational reality. This isn't surface level self-help. This isn't about affirmations on sticky notes or bubble baths masquerading as self-care. This is about dismantling the inherited patterns that keep you stuck, reclaiming the parts of yourself that were shamed or silenced, and then using that reclaimed power to lead in your family, your work, your own life, from a place that's embodied, conscious, and deeply aligned. Because when your internal infrastructure is solid, when your internal relational capital is robust, every relationship becomes a site for healing, clarity, and true impact, including and especially the one that you have with yourself. I share this information because I see you. For those of you navigating this tumultuous path, I see you because I recognize the terrain. I've walked it myself. I've sat in the confusion, the guilt, the resentment that feels like it might consume you from the inside out. I've been there, done that, got the t-shirt, and several life throws to prove it. Quick note before we dive deeper. Some of what I'm about to share might hit close to home. Some might feel like I'm narrating chapters from your own life. Other parts might not resonate at all. And that's completely normal. It's exactly as it should be. We each come from our own unique constellations of circumstances, patterns, and family dynamics. What I'm offering here are the common threads I've observed repeatedly in my coaching work. The patterns that show up consistently, so consistently that they demand attention. So take what fits, leave what doesn't. If something doesn't land for you, it's simply meant for someone else who needs to hear it. And remember, every video includes a practical exercise designed to assist with your healing journey. So stay tuned to the end. Don't just consume the information passively. Engage with it, work with it. Now let's dive into the dynamics when the roles of the matriarch wannabe and the enabling patriarch are flipped. Here's what research and clinical experience both confirm. The fundamental outcome of controlling parents, psychological manipulation, and dysfunctional family dynamics are broadly similar, regardless of which parent is wielding the control. In other words, whether you have a patriarch wannabe enabled by a matriarch or a matriarch wannabe enabled by a patriarch, the core negative impacts on the child and the family system mirror each other with remarkable consistency. Why? Because the psychological mechanisms at play, parental psychological control, enmeshment, narcissistic traits, conditional love, are not inherently gender specific in their effect on developing minds. Think of it like this: whether you're breathing polluted air from a factory or from a wildfire smoke, your lungs still suffer. The source might be different, but the damage follows similar patterns. A child's developing self-esteem, autonomy, emotional regulation, and ability to form healthy relationships are compromised when either parent, especially when one enables the other, consistently undermines these developmental needs. However, and this is crucial, there can be subtle differences in the manifestation or nuances of the impact. These differences are often influenced by societal gender norms and the specific ways power and control are typically expressed by each gender. Let's break down the core similarities first, because understanding these is like understanding the foundations of a house. The specific architecture might vary, but the foundation determines whether the entire structure stands or whether it crumbles. So firstly, we have diminished self-esteem and self-worth. Imagine building a house on quicksand. Every brick you lay, every wall you construct is inherently unstable because the ground beneath keeps shifting. That's what it's like to develop a sense of self in a wannabe enabler dynamic, regardless of which parent holds which role. Children raised in this environment grow up internalizing the belief that love is conditional. It's not stated explicitly. That would be too obvious. Instead, it's transmitted through 1,000 micro interactions. Approval is subtly or sometimes overtly tied to compliance, emotional availability to the parent, or maintaining the parent's self-image and authority. The message becomes clear. You are acceptable when you meet my needs. You are lovable when you don't challenge me. You are worthy when you reflect well on me. As a result, the child's sense of worth becomes externally referenced rather than internally anchored. They learn to check the room before they check themselves, to read faces before they read their own hearts, to prioritize everyone's comfort over their own authenticity. In adulthood, this shows up in predictable, painful patterns. These include chronic self-doubt, even in objectively successful individuals. I've worked with accomplished professionals who freeze when asked what they want because they've spent so long calibrating to what others need. Or a tendency to seek reassurance constantly while simultaneously distrusting any praise that comes their way. It's a cruel paradox. Desperately needing validation while being unable to truly receive it. Why? Because deep down they believe that the positive feedback is conditional, temporary, or based on false information. Or we have over-reliance on external validation, coupled with an internal voice that's relentlessly critical, particularly self-critical. One client described it perfectly. She said, it's like I need everyone to tell me I'm doing okay, but when they do, I assume they're just being nice or they don't really know me. Or we have a deep, often unnamed fear of getting it wrong. This isn't about perfectionism in the achievement sense. It's about the terror of making the wrong choice and experiencing emotional abandonment as a consequence. Because their internal compass was overridden repeatedly throughout their childhood. For many, trusting their own judgment feels fundamentally unsafe. Confidence becomes performative rather than embodied. They can appear confident to the outside world. They've learned that skill well, but internally they're constantly scanning for signs that they've miscalculated, that approval is about to be withdrawn. Then we have difficulty with autonomy and individuation. In healthy development, a child gradually separates from their parents. They develop their own preferences, opinions, values, and identity. This process, called individuation, requires caregivers who can tolerate even celebrate their child becoming a separate person. But the wannabe parent, whether matriarch or patriarch, fundamentally struggles with this. Your independence isn't seen as healthy development. It's experienced as betrayal, rejection, or ingratitude. I had a client, we'll call him Marcus, whose father expected him to join the family business. Not suggested, expected. When Marcus expressed interest in studying environmental science instead of business, his father didn't respond with curiosity or support. He responded as if Marcus had announced he was abandoning the family entirely. After everything I've done for you, his father said, this is how you repay me. Notice the language. Marcus's separate interests weren't about Marcus. They were about his father. They were framed as an act against his father rather than a natural step towards himself. This is what happens in the wannabe dynamic. Children learn, usually implicitly, that having separate needs threatens relational safety. Choosing differently may destabilize the family system. Their role is to remain emotionally tethered, available, and compliant. Independence equals disloyalty. In adulthood, this can manifest as paralysis around major life decisions. Should I take the job? Should I move city? Should I end this relationship? The question isn't just about weighing pros and cons. It's about navigating the minefield of family expectations and the guilt that comes with disappointing them. Then we have difficulty knowing what they actually want versus what's expected. After decades of calibrating to someone else's desires, their own preferences become foggy, uncertain, almost inaccessible. Then we have over-identification with family roles like caretaker, fixer, mediator, or peacekeeper. These roles feel like identity because they were the only way to maintain belonging. Or we have a delayed or fractured sense of identity. Many people from these backgrounds describe feeling like they're constantly trying to figure out who they are, even well into their 30s or 40s. They've spent so long being who they needed to be that discovering who they are feels like learning a foreign language. Or autonomy feels risky because it was never emotionally permitted. Your job wasn't to become yourself. Your job was to be what they needed you to be. And then we have emotional dysregulation. In healthy families, parents serve as emotional mirrors and co-regulators. When a child is upset, the parent reflects that emotion back with empathy, helps the child name what they're feeling, and guides them through the experience. They might say something like, "You look like you're angry right now. I can see that. It's okay to feel angry. Let's figure out what to do with that feeling." But in the wannabe enabler dynamic, emotions are often managed for the child or dismissed altogether. Feelings that inconvenience the controlling parent, like anger, sadness, fear, or dissent, are minimized, reframed, or punished. Statements such as, "Don't be ridiculous, you're overreacting," "Stop being so sensitive," "If you're going to cry, go to your room," or the very common one, "Stop crying or I'll give you something to cry about." The message is clear. Your emotions are wrong, excessive, inconvenient, or manipulative. The child learns to either suppress rather than process, to smile when they're hurting, to freeze when they're scared, to perform calm when they're raging inside. Or they have little emotional control at all, and they express emotions such as anger and sadness at inappropriate times or out of proportion to the incident that triggered the emotion. The long-term impacts include difficulty identifying internal emotional states. How are you feeling becomes an impossible question because they were never taught to attune to their internal experience. Or we have overwhelm when emotions surface unexpectedly, because emotions were suppressed for so long. When they finally break through, they can arrive as a flood rather than manageable waves. Then we have emotional numbing, often followed by sudden intensity. Many can oscillate between feeling nothing and feeling everything, with little middle ground. Shame around having feelings at all. Emotions themselves can become evidence of weakness or dysfunction. Because emotions were never mirrored or validated, the nervous system never learnt regulation through connection. Many adult children oscillate between hyper-control, white-knuckling their way through life, and emotional flooding, where everything falls apart at once. One client described it this way: I'm either completely shut down or completely overwhelmed. There's no in between. It's like my emotional thermostat is broken. Then we have impaired relationships. We learn what love looks like by watching our parents. We form our relational template in childhood, and those templates become the blueprint we unconsciously follow in adulthood. If your template for closeness involves control and obligation rather than mutuality and respect, that's what will feel familiar. And in relationship, familiar often trumps healthy. Children of wannabe enabler dynamics often equate intimacy with someone knowing what you need without you having to ask. So in other words, mind reading. Or they equate it with sacrificing your preferences to maintain peace, or feeling responsible for managing someone else's emotions, or staying in painful situations to prove your loyalty. This results in predictable adult relationship patterns, people-pleasing or self-abandonment. They reflexively prioritize others' needs, often before those needs are even stated. They've been trained to be hypervigilant to others' emotional states and to adjust themselves accordingly. Or difficulty in setting and maintaining boundaries without crushing guilt. Saying no feels like abandonment. Protecting their own time, energy, or preferences feels selfish. The guilt is so intense, it's easier just to acquiesce. Or it can show through as attraction to controlling, emotionally unavailable, or overly dependent partners. This isn't masochism, it's familiarity. These dynamics feel like home because they match the original template. A healthy mutual relationship can actually feel uncomfortable, boring, or even suspicious because it's so foreign. Then they have often distrust of intimacy paired with a desperate longing for it. They want closeness but fear the control that might come from it. They crave being fully known but are terrified of being vulnerable. Reciprocity feels unfamiliar. Relationships may feel draining, confusing, or asymmetrical because their early bonds were not based on emotional equality. One person's needs always mattered more. One person's feelings always took precedence. Then we have intergenerational transmission of dysfunction. Here's one of the most tragic aspects of these dynamics. Without conscious interruption, these patterns repeat. What was modeled can become normalized, even if it's painful, even if you swore you'd never be like them. The patterns don't continue because you're weak or because you don't love your children. They continue because of learned behavior and nervous system conditioning. Your body learnt that this is what safety looks like. Your mind learnt that this is what love requires. Alternatively, what was modelled can be outwardly rejected and replaced with another form of dysfunction. One of the most common manifestations of this is when the children of the overly controlling and authoritarian patriarch or matriarch wannabe become overly permissive parents with no or very loose boundaries, because the adult child of the wannabe, to them, enforcing consequences and boundaries on their children feels like they're inflicting abuse or pain on their child. This isn't due to lack of love. It's due to lack of repair. Unexamined dysfunction tends to perpetuate or to show itself in different forms. And herein lies one of the key reasons for you to pursue your healing with urgency and compassion, so the dysfunction stops with you, so your children don't have to spend their 30s in therapy unpacking the same patterns you're unpacking now. You have the power to be a circuit breaker, the pattern interrupter, the one who says it ends here. Then we have resentment and guilt. One of the most corrosive impacts of the wannabe enabler dynamic is what psychologists call the loyalty bind. You're conditioned to prioritize the parent's emotional needs over your own while being denied acknowledgement of the cost. You're expected to give endlessly while your own needs are minimized or ignored. You're supposed to be grateful for the crumbs while ignoring that you're starving. This creates a painful, crazy-making duality. Guilt for wanting distance, boundaries, or a separate life. Even thinking about moving across the country, declining a holiday gathering, or limiting contact can trigger waves of guilt so intense they're almost physical. And then, on the other hand, resentment for being emotionally burdened or constrained. You may resent the constant demands, the emotional manipulation, the way your life still revolves around managing their feelings. But here's the cruel twist. Because resentment feels wrong or disloyal, it's often turned inwards. You can't be angry at them. You've been taught that's betrayal. So you become angry or disappointed in yourself. This can manifest as relentless self-criticism, burnout and chronic exhaustion. Somatic symptoms such as headaches, digestive issues, chronic pain or fatigue. Or feelings of being trapped between obligation and self-preservation. You feel like a terrible person for even feeling resentful. After all, they're your parents. They did their best. They provided for you. But intention doesn't negate impact. Effort doesn't erase harm. And acknowledging that you were hurt doesn't make you ungrateful. It makes you honest. Then we have anxiety, depression, and other mental health conditions. Growing up in an environment of chronic emotional invalidation creates sustained nervous system stress. You're not in physical danger, but you're constantly in relational danger. The brain does not differentiate between physical danger and emotional danger. The child in you is perpetually monitoring emotional cues, adapting behavior and suppressing authentic responses to maintain stability. Your nervous system is on high alert, scanning for threats disguised as love. The long-term outcomes may include generalized anxiety or hypervigilance, always waiting for the other shoe to drop, always scanning for signs of disapproval, never quite able to relax fully. Or depressive patterns rooted in learned helplessness, when nothing you do is quite enough, when your needs are constantly unmet, when expressing yourself leads to punishment, You learn that effort is pointless. You learned helplessness. This can evolve into clinical depression. Then we have perfectionism and overachievement as coping strategies. If you can be successful enough, accomplished enough, perfect enough, then maybe you'll finally be accepted. Maybe you'll be safe. We have emotional exhaustion and identity confusion. You're tired from decades of performing. You're confused about who you actually are beneath all the adaptation. These outcomes are not a reflection of individual weakness. They are adaptive responses to prolonged relational stress, regardless of parent gender. Your anxiety isn't evidence that you're broken. It's evidence that you've survived an environment that required constant vigilance. Your depression isn't proof that you're defective. It's the natural outcome of having your authentic self repeatedly rejected. Let me share Lynette's story to illustrate how these dynamics play out in real life. Lynette's mother was rarely home. She was the primary income earner of the household, often working long hours or travelling for business. The majority of the child-rearing responsibility fell to Lynette's father. On the surface, this might seem like a positive step, an involved father, right? But involvement isn't the same as healthy engagement. Lynette's father developed a relationship with her that could only be described as enmeshment. She became his confidant, his emotional support, his companion in ways that weren't appropriate for a child. He shared his frustrations about his wife. He relied on Lynette to manage his emotional states. He expected her to be available to him in ways that left no room for her to develop her own identity. Lynette was not given the space to develop a sense of self, separate from her father's needs. His emotions became her responsibility. His loneliness became her problem to solve. The impact? Lynette struggled profoundly with her ability to function independently as an adult. Making decisions for her own benefit felt impossible. Setting boundaries in relationships felt like betrayal. She attracted partners who were emotionally needy and then resented them for it, recreating the dynamic that she knew best. In Lynette's case, her father took the form of the wannabe. His role as the primary caregiver morphed into meeting his own need for ally-type relationships. He wasn't parenting her. He was using her to fill voids in his adult life. And Lynette's mother, she enabled this by never stepping in to stop the enmeshment dynamic. Whether through absence, denial, or her own avoidance of conflict, she allowed the unhealthy relationship to flourish unchecked. Two parents, two different forms of dysfunction, one deeply harmed child. Now let's examine the subtle differences that can emerge depending on which parent embodies the wannabe role. Remember, the core mechanisms are the same, but the flavour, the specific manifestations can be influenced by societal gender norms and how those norms shape the expression of control. So firstly, let's look at the nature of control and manipulation. So when we have a patriarch wannabe enabled by a matriarch, his control is often more overt, authoritarian and rule-based. Think traditional patriarchal authority. Because I said so, my house, my rules, I'm the head of this household. The emphasis tends to be on obedience, tradition and adherence to the way things are done. His word is law. Questioning him is insubordination. Disobeying him is unthinkable. The mother's enabling often manifest as constantly deferring to him, minimizing his harshness to the children with statements like he's just stressed or you know how your father is, or actively enforcing his rules even if she privately disagrees. She might pull you aside and say, just do what he says. It's easier that way. Don't make waves. She teaches you through her actions that keeping him happy is everyone's job, that his comfort takes precedence over everyone else's well-being, that peace is more important than justice. Then we have the matriarch wannabe enabled by the patriarch. Her control often leans more towards emotional manipulation, guilt-tripping, fostering dependency, or subtle triangulation. It's generally less about overt commands and more about emotional coercion. Quotes like, "After all I've sacrificed for you," or "I guess I'm just a terrible mother. Fine, do what you want, I'll be fine alone." The father's enabling might manifest as passive acceptance, financial provision that reinforces her power, or avoiding conflict at all cost. He's the "don't upset your mother" parent. He funds the dysfunction, provides the stability that allows it to continue, and remove himself from any emotional engagement that might challenge the dynamic. He teaches you through his inaction that confrontation is dangerous, that it's better to appease than to address, that women's emotions are volatile things to be managed rather than to be understood. And then let's secondly look at the impact on sons versus daughters. The gender of both the controlling parent and the child creates specific permutations of impact. When we have daughters with a controlling father or a patriarch wannabe, they may struggle profoundly with asserting their voice, challenging authority, or developing a strong sense of personal power. They internalize messages about female submission, about women needing to defer to male authority, about their opinions mattering less. They might become hypercritical of themselves, holding themselves to impossible standards, while giving men in their lives disproportionate authority. Or they might swing the opposite direction, becoming rigidly defensive against any male authority, unable to trust men at all. The mother's enabling teaches them that a woman's role is to accommodate, to defer, to smooth things over. They learn that challenging a man's authority is futile or dangerous. They learn to make themselves smaller. Then we have sons with a controlling father or patriarch wannabe. They may struggle with emotional expression, vulnerability, or developing empathy if masculinity is equated with stoicism, dominance, and emotional suppression. Statements such as "boys don't cry," "man up," or "don't be a sissy." They might either replicate the controlling behavior, learning that being a man means being authoritarian, or becoming overly passive, so terrified of becoming like their father that they overcorrect into ineffectuality. They struggle to find a healthy masculine identity between these two extremes. What does it mean to be a man if your only model was toxic? Then we have the dynamic of daughters with controlling mothers or matriarch wannabes. Research suggests that daughters may be particularly susceptible to maternal psychological control, potentially leading to deeper enmeshment, body image issues, or difficulty separating from maternal influence. The mother-daughter relationship can be a minefield of comparison, competition, and projection. The mother might envy her daughter's youth, beauty, or opportunities, She might live vicariously through her daughter or criticize her daughter for making different choices. The damage to the daughter's developing sense of self can be particularly profound because the person who should be modeling healthy womanhood is instead modeling dysfunction. Then we have the dynamic of sons with a controlling mother or matriarch wannabe. They may struggle with boundaries, assertiveness, especially with women, or developing a clear masculine identity outside of their mother's influence. They might become mama's boys or struggle with independence, who unconsciously compare every woman to their mother, who feel guilty for any choice that disappoints her. Or they might rebel fiercely, cutting off all emotional connection, swinging to the opposite extreme to escape her grip. They often struggle in romantic relationships because no woman feels quite right. Either she's too much like mum, triggering enmeshment anxiety, or too different from mum, triggering abandonment anxiety. Then now let's look at societal perceptions and support. Society's enabled gender norms affect how these dynamics are perceived and whether intervention occurs. Controlling fathers might be normalized because patriarchal authority is deeply embedded in many cultures. Statements such as "he's just being strict" or "that's what fathers do, they maintain discipline." This normalization makes it harder for children to recognize the dysfunction. If society affirms that this is normal, healthy even, how do you trust your own discomfort? Controlling mothers might face more societal judgment when their behaviour becomes visible. But here's the insidious part. If the father enables her, the family might present as more stable or less visibly dysfunctional front to the outside world. Mum appears devoted, dad appears supportive. The family seems intact. The dysfunction happens behind closed doors, making it harder for others to intervene or for the children to articulate their distress. After all, if your family looks normal from the outside, maybe you're the problem for feeling that something's wrong. The research on parental psychological control generally shows broad negative effects regardless of parent gender. Both maternal and paternal psychological control is harmful to the child's development, full stop. However, some studies explore specific gender differences. Some research suggests that paternal psychological control might have a stronger negative impact on certain outcomes like internalizing problems or decision-making competence, particularly in boys. The father-son dynamic or father-daughter dynamic can create specific vulnerabilities. Other studies suggest that maternal psychological control can have particularly strong effects on girls' psychological adjustment, especially regarding self-esteem, body image, and internalizing issues like anxiety and depression. The overall consensus: both mothers and fathers contribute significantly to child development, and parental psychological control from either parent is profoundly detrimental. The enabling behaviour of the non-controlling parent is absolutely critical because it removes a potential buffer. In healthy families, if one parent is having a bad day or reacting poorly, the other parent can step in, provide balance, offer the child another perspective or source of support. But when one parent is controlling and the other enables, there's nowhere for the child to turn. The entire system is compromised. Here's another layer of complexity that's worth addressing. In some households, the parents don't maintain consistent roles. The mother and father figures swap between being the wannabe and being the enabler, or they each retain different aspects of both roles simultaneously. This creates a particularly confusing and toxic environment because there's no predictability. You can't learn the rules because the rules keep changing depending on which parent is in which mode. Let me share Sharon's story to illustrate this. Sharon's mother exhibited matriarch wannabe tendencies through criticism and treating any of Sharon's needs as an inconvenience. Need help with your homework? Figure it out yourself, I'm busy. Struggling emotionally? Stop being needy. Sharon learned that she could not expect assistance or support from her mother. Asking for help was met with irritation or outright rejection. In this regard, Sharon's father was the enabler, backing up the criticism when called upon by Sharon's mother, reinforcing the message that Sharon's needs didn't matter. But here's where it gets complicated. Sharon's father had his own brand of toxicity. He was an empire builder, insisting that he was the center of attention, that everyone in the house must jump to fulfill his requests immediately. In this regard, Sharon's mother became the enabler, insisting that everyone meet his needs, his demands as quickly as possible, reinforcing his authority, making sure no one challenged him. So Sharon grew up in a house where her mother criticized her. Her father supported that criticism. Her father demanded everyone's service and her mother enforced those demands. Neither parent provided a safe harbor. Both parents alternated between controlling and enabling depending on the situation. The result? An intensely toxic and isolating upbringing. Sharon never knew which version of which parent she'd encounter. She couldn't predict safely. She couldn't find refuge. This dual toxicity dynamic creates particularly severe outcomes because there's literally no escape within the family system. At least when roles are consistent, you know what you're dealing with. But when they swap and shift, you're constantly off balance, never able to find solid ground. While the fundamental mechanisms of psychological harm remain largely the same, regardless of which parent embodies the wannabe role, the flavour of the control and its specific impact on sons versus daughters can be subtly influenced by traditional gender roles and how those roles are enacted within the dysfunctional dynamic. The common thread, the through line in all of these scenarios is this: a controlling parent, especially when enabled by the other parent, creates a profoundly challenging environment that undermines a child's healthy development. Whether that controlling parent is your father or your mother, whether you're a son or a daughter, whether the control is overt and authoritarian or covert and emotionally manipulative, the impact on your development is significant and lasting. Here's what I want you to hear. The impact doesn't have to be permanent. It's not a life sentence. It's a starting point for understanding. And understanding is the first step towards healing. If you've been raised by a wannabe patriarch or matriarch, chances are you're still unpacking, making sense of, and healing from the long-term effects. You're still learning that your needs matter. You're still practicing having preferences and defending them. You're still figuring out who you are when you're not performing for someone else. And here's something I've observed across hundreds of clients. Many survivors of the wannabe dynamics struggle profoundly with their own self-care. The irony? Your self-care is absolutely critical to facilitating your recovery. You can't heal a nervous system that's chronically depleted. You can't rewire relational patterns when you're running on empty. You can't rebuild internal relational capital without investing in the infrastructure that supports it. So the exercise for this video is a self-care audit. This isn't about bubble baths and face masks, so those are lovely. This is about examining the actual foundation of your physical and mental well-being. Here's what you'll need: a notepad and pen, 30 to 45 minutes of uninterrupted time, a willingness to be honest with yourself. Step 1, create your framework. Label 4 separate pages with these headlines: sleep, diet, exercise, and mindset. Step 2, conduct your audit. Under each page heading, make a self-assessment of the quality of your self-care in that domain. What do you do well? Be specific. Example, I go to bed at a constant time, or I eat vegetables with most meals, or I move my body 3 times a week, or I practice gratitude daily. Acknowledge what you're already doing well. This isn't about berating yourself. It's about getting an accurate picture. Then look at what needs to improve. Again, be honest and specific. I scroll on my phone till 2 a.m. I skip meals when I'm stressed. I haven't exercised in 6 months. My internal dialogue is relentlessly self-critical. This requires vulnerability. It requires admitting where you're struggling. That's okay. It's actually brave. Then rate yourself on a scale of 1 to 10. How well do you currently care for yourself in this area? Be honest. If your sleep is garbage, don't give yourself a 7 because you managed to get 4 hours sleep. If your diet consists primarily of caffeine and stress, don't round up. The truth is what will set you free. And then step 3, create your action plan. For each of the 4 domains, identify one concrete, actionable improvement you can implement. Not 10 things, not a complete overhaul, one thing per domain. So for example, you could say, in terms of sleep, I will turn off screens 30 minutes before bed. Or in terms of diet, I will eat a protein-rich breakfast 5 days a week. Or for exercise, I will take a 10-minute walk 3 times a week. Or mindset, I will write down 3 things I'm grateful for each morning. Start small, build slowly. Just one small improvement per week can make a massive difference over time. Why this exercise matters? This exercise gives you several things that are crucial to your healing. Self-reflection. You're pausing to actually examine how you're treating yourself rather than just surviving on autopilot. It also gives you self-awareness. You're building the capacity to observe yourself without judgment, to see patterns you might have been blind to. It also gives you a baseline, a benchmark. You're creating a snapshot of where you are right now, which allows you to track your progress over time. It also gives you a concrete plan. You're moving from vague intentions like I should take better care of myself to specific actions you can actually implement. Here's the truth. If you can train yourself into genuine self-care, not just bubble baths and shopping sprees, but actual foundational care of your body and mind, you're giving yourself the foundation from which you can free yourself from the negative effects of toxic upbringing. You can't think your way out of trauma that's stored in the body. You can't therapy yourself into healing if you're not sleeping, eating, or moving in ways that support your nervous system regulation. Self-care isn't selfish, it's strategic. It's the infrastructure that makes all other healing possible. Now, I want to encourage you to not just be a passive viewer. Don't just watch the video, nod along, and then move on with your day unchanged. honestly, authentically do the exercise. Grab that notebook, block out that time, do the work. Because the more actively you work towards your healing, the faster you kickstart your own recovery. Knowledge without action is just entertainment. Action is what creates transformation. If this information has been helpful for you, it's likely going to be helpful for at least one other person in the same predicament. Help me spread this awareness by sharing, liking, and subscribing. And let me know that you found this information helpful by typing the phrase self-care in the comments below. Stay tuned for future videos where we continue unpacking the matriarch wannabe, the patriarch wannabe, and your healing journey. Or here's a video that can help you identify if you have a matriarch wannabe in your life. I recommend you watch that one next. Remember, you're not broken. You are not too much or not enough. You are someone who survived a challenging developmental environment, and now you're choosing to rebuild. That takes courage. That takes strength. You deserve to build a life where your needs matter, where your voice is valued, where your autonomy is celebrated. That life is possible, and it starts with understanding where you've been so that you can consciously choose where you're going. Bye for now.